It was a bright, sunny Saturday morning in Oakwood Estates, the kind of day that makes you want to be outside, feeling the warm sun on your face. The birds were chirping, the sky was a clear blue, and everything seemed calm and happy. In one small house on Maple Street, Jake Miller was having a great start to his day off. Jake was a guy who liked things simple. He worked hard all week, fixing cars and trucks at his mechanic shop, and now he just wanted to relax. His favorite thing in the world was right there in his driveway, his shiny black motorcycle. It wasn't just any bike, it was his pride and joy, the thing he loved most. He'd spent hours cleaning it, making sure every part sparkled in the sunlight. To Jake, that motorcycle was like a best friend. Jake wasn't loud or showy. He was quiet, the kind of person who didn't talk much unless you asked him something. He kept his yard neat, paid his bills on time, and never caused any trouble. If you saw him, you might think he was just a regular guy, maybe even boring. But Jake had a secret, something nobody in Oakwood Estates knew about. And that secret was about to make this ordinary day anything but ordinary. Across the street, behind a perfectly trimmed bush, someone was watching Jake. Her name was Karen Baxter, and she was the president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. Now, if you've never heard of an HOA, it's a group that makes rules for a neighborhood, like how tall your grass can be or what color your mailbox should be. Karen loved being in charge of the HOA. She loved it too much. To her, the neighborhood was like her own little kingdom, and she was the queen. As if your fence was a tiny bit crooked or your garbage can stayed out too long, Karen would know. And she'd make sure you got a letter or even a fine to fix it. Everyone in Oakwood Estates had a nickname for her, HOA Karen. They whispered it when she wasn't around because Karen had a way of making people nervous. She was the kind of person who'd measure your grass with a ruler and send you a note if it was half an inch too long. If your dog barked once, she'd be at your door complaining. If you hung a holiday wreath she didn't like, you'd hear about it. Karen thought she knew everything about everyone, and she was sure her rules kept the neighborhood perfect. That morning, Karen stood at her window, her eyes locked on Jake's driveway. She didn't like Jake's motorcycle, not one bit. To her it was loud and ugly, something that didn't belong in her perfect little world. She didn't care that it was parked exactly where it should be, right in Jake's own driveway. She didn't care that Jake had every right to have it there. All she saw was something she wanted gone. And when Karen wanted something, she didn't stop until she got her way. Jake, meanwhile, was humming a little tune as he wiped down his bike with a soft cloth. He loved how the chrome parts shone like a mirror. He wasn't thinking about Karen or her rules. He wasn't thinking about trouble at all. He was just happy, enjoying the fresh air and the chance to spend time with his favorite thing. If you'd asked him, he'd say life was good. But Karen had other plans. She wasn't just watching Jake, she was planning. Her lips were pressed tight and her eyes were narrow like a cat about to pounce. She didn't know Jake as well as she thought she did. She saw a guy with a motorcycle, someone she could boss around, someone who'd back down if she pushed hard enough. That's what she always did, push until people did what she wanted. It had worked with other neighbors, like when she made Mr. Thompson repaint his shed, or when she got the Wilsons to take down their basketball hoop. Karen was sure she could handle Jake, too. What Karen didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that Jake wasn't just a mechanic. He wasn't just a quiet guy who liked motorcycles. There was more to him, something big, something that would make Karen wish she'd never looked at his bike. Her perfect little world, where she thought she controlled everything, was about to get a whole lot messier. The street was quiet except for the soft hum of Jake's cloth sliding over the bike. A few kids rode by on their scooters, laughing and calling to each other. A dog barked somewhere down the block. It felt like any other day in Oakwood Estates. But something was brewing, something that would change things for Jake, for Karen, and for everyone who lived there. If you'd been standing there watching it all, you might have felt it, a little tingle, like when you know something exciting is about to happen. Jake didn't seem worried, but maybe he knew more than he was letting on. Karen didn't seem scared, but maybe she should have been. The stage was set and the show was about to start. So what do you think Karen's going to do next? Is she going to yell at Jake, write him a nasty letter, or something even bigger? And what about Jake? What's his secret, and how's it going to change everything? Stick around, because this story about to get really good. Let's pause for a second. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a neighbor who acted like they owned the whole street? Maybe they complained about your toys or your bike or even your dog. Drop a comment below and tell me about it. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from today. Oh, and if you like stories where the underdog comes out on top, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Back to Jake. He was still in his driveway, totally focused on his motorcycle. He didn't notice Karen's glare from across the street. He didn't hear her muttering to herself about rules and standards. He was in his own world, a happy one, where the only thing that mattered was the bike in front of him. But that world was about to collide with Karen, and when it did, sparks were going to fly. Karen wasn't the kind of person who waited around. If she didn't like something, she acted fast. She'd already decided Jake's motorcycle was a problem and she wasn't going to let it slide. In her mind, she was protecting the neighborhood, keeping it perfect, like a picture in a magazine. She didn't care what Jake thought or how much he loved that bike. To her, it was just a noisy, messy thing that didn't fit in. But here's the thing about Karen. She thought she knew everything. She thought she had all the power. She thought she could scare Jake into doing what she wanted, just like she'd scared other people before. What she didn't realize was that Jake wasn't scared, not even a little. He wasn't the kind of guy who backed down when someone tried to push him around. And that secret he was keeping, it was like a hidden card up his sleeve, one he hadn't played yet but was ready to use if he needed it. The sun climbed higher in the sky and the day got warmer. Jake stepped back to admire his bike, smiling at how perfect it looked. He didn't know Karen was about to make her move. He didn't know she was already planning how to get rid of his motorcycle for good. But maybe, just maybe, he had a feeling something was coming. Maybe that's why he seemed so calm, like a guy who knew he had nothing to worry about. Oakwood Estates looked peaceful with its neat lawns and tidy houses. But under the surface, things were starting to bubble. Karen was ready to start a fight and Jake was about to surprise everyone. The neighbors didn't know it yet, but they were in for a show, one they'd talk about for years. So what's Karen going to do? Is she going to march over and yell at Jake? Is she going to call someone to complain? Or is she going to try something even sneakier? And what's Jake hiding that's going to turn this whole thing upside down? You don't want to miss what happens next, so keep watching. This is just the start, and already you can feel it, right? Something big is coming, something that's going to make you laugh, maybe even cheer. Jake's just a guy with a bike, or so it seems. Karen's just a bossy neighbor, or so she thinks. But there's more to this story, and it's going to be awesome. Let's check in one more time. What do you think Jake's secret is? Is he a superhero, a secret agent, or something totally different? Guess in the comments and let's see who gets it right. And don't forget, if you're loving this, hit that subscribe button and join the fun. I'll see you in the next part where things get even wilder. The sun was shining bright in Oakwood Estates, but things were about to get stormy. Karen Baxter, the HOA president, marched out of her house like she was on a mission. Her face was all scrunched up like she'd just smelled a skunk. In her hand, she held her phone, gripping it tight. She stopped at the edge of her lawn and pointed right at Jake Miller's driveway. "That thing is an eyesore," she yelled, her voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. She was talking about Jake's motorcycle, the one he loved more than anything. Jake was kneeling by his bike, wiping the shiny chrome with a soft rag. He heard Karen's shout, but he didn't even look up. He just kept polishing, slow and steady, like he didn't have a care in the world. "It's in my driveway, Karen," he said, his voice calm and quiet. But Karen wasn't listening. She stomped her foot and snapped, "This is a respectable neighborhood. That noisy junk doesn't belong here. I'm calling the HOA board right now." Jake gave a little shrug like it was no big deal, but deep down he was starting to get annoyed. Karen had bugged him before lots of times, actually. Once she complained that his music was too loud, even though he was just playing the radio softly in his garage. Another time, she sent him a letter saying his mailbox was too rusty, even though it was brand new. And don't get him started on the time she got mad about how he parked his truck, like it mattered if it was an inch too close to the curb. Every time, Karen acted like she owned the whole street, like she could boss everyone around. Jake was tired of it, but he stayed cool. He wasn't the type to yell or argue. Not yet, anyway. What Karen didn't know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that Jake wasn't just some guy with a motorcycle. He had a secret, a big one, and it was like a bomb waiting to go off. Karen thought she was in charge, but she was about to find out she picked the wrong person to mess with. Have you ever had someone act like they knew everything about you, but they were totally wrong? Maybe a kid at school thought you couldn't do something, or a grown-up judged you before you could show what you're made of. That's what's happening here, and Karen's in for a surprise. Let's keep going to see how she's about to learn her lesson. Karen stood there, glaring at Jake, her phone still in her hand. She started typing fast, probably sending a message to the HOA board. She looked so sure of herself, like she'd already won. To her, Jake was just a guy who didn't follow her rule, someone she could scare into doing what she wanted. She'd done it before with other neighbors. Like when she made Mrs. Lopez take down her pretty garden lights because they were too bright. Or when she told the Carter kids they couldn't ride their skateboards on the sidewalk. Karen always got her way, and she loved it. But Jake wasn't like the others. He didn't argue, but he didn't back down either. He just kept wiping his motorcycle, making it shine even brighter. If you looked close, you might have seen a tiny smile on his face, like he knew something Karen didn't. And he did know something. That secret of his, it was big and it was going to change everything. Across the street, a couple of neighbors peeked out their windows. They'd heard Karen yelling and they knew she was up to something. Nobody liked getting on Karen's bad side, so most people just did what she said. But Jake, he wasn't scared. He'd dealt with people like Karen before, people who thought they could push him around because he was quiet. What they didn't know was that Jake's quiet didn't mean weak. It meant he was thinking, planning, waiting for the right moment. Karen finished typing and put her phone in her pocket. She crossed her arms and stared at Jake like she was daring him to say something. "You'll be sorry," she said, her voice sharp. "The HOA has rules and I make sure they're followed." Jake didn't answer. He just kept working on his bike, like Karen's words were nothing but a breeze passing by. That made Karen even madder. She wasn't used to being ignored. She wanted Jake to fight back, to give her a reason to yell more. But Jake wasn't giving her what she wanted. Not yet. "What do you think about Karen right now? Is she being fair or is she just being a bully? Drop a comment and let me know. And while you're at it, tell me if you've ever met someone like her. I bet you have a story." The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, even though the sky was clear. Karen turned and marched back to her house, her shoes clicking on the pavement. She was probably thinking about all the ways she could make Jake get rid of his motorcycle. Maybe she'd fine him, or maybe she'd call someone to tow the bike away. Whatever she was planning, she was sure it would work. Karen always thought she was the smartest person on the block. Jake, though, wasn't worried. He stood up and stretched, looking at his motorcycle with a proud smile. It wasn't just a bike to him, it was freedom, a way to feel alive. He'd worked hard to buy it, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away, not even Karen. He knew she was trouble, but he also knew something she didn't. That secret he was keeping, it was like a shield, something that would protect him when the time was right. A kid rode by on a bike, waving at Jake. Jake waved back, friendly as always. He wasn't the kind of guy who got mad easily, but Karen was pushing him. Every time she complained, every time she acted like she was better than him, it added a little more fuel to the fire inside him. He wasn't going to let her win, not this time. Karen's front door slammed shut and the street got quiet again, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet you feel before something big happens, like when you're waiting for a firecracker to pop. Jake went back to cleaning his bike, but his mind was working. He knew Karen wasn't done. She'd keep coming after him, trying to make him feel small. What she didn't know was that Jake was ready. He'd been ready for a long time. Can you feel it? Something about to happen, something that's going to shake things up. Karen thinks she's got Jake all figured out, but she's wrong. So wrong. Stick around, because this is where things start to get really exciting. The sun was high in the sky now, and Oakwood Estates was buzzing with the usual Saturday sounds, kids laughing, a lawnmower humming, and birds chirping in the trees. But over on Maple Street, things were getting tense. Karen Baxter, the HOA president, was on a mission to make Jake Miller's life miserable. She'd already yelled at him about his motorcycle, calling it an eyesore. Now, she was taking it to the next level. For the next hour, Karen turned into a detective, like a kid playing spy, but way bossier. Karen grabbed her phone and started snapping pictures of Jake's motorcycle. Click, 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 she took shots from every angle like she was building a case for a big crime. She zoomed in on the shiny wheels, the black seat, even the handlebars. "This will prove it's against the rules," she muttered to herself, her lips tight. She scribbled notes on a little pad, writing things like "too loud" and "bad for the neighborhood." Karen was sure she was right, like always. She thought Jake's bike was making the whole street look bad, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Next, Karen called her friend Mrs. Jenkins, who lived 2 houses down. "Can you believe this guy?" Karen whined into the phone. "He's ruining our property values with that ugly motorcycle. It's a disgrace." Mrs. Jenkins didn't say much, just mumbled a few words to be polite, but Karen kept going, complaining louder and louder. She didn't care who heard her. She wanted everyone to know Jake was breaking her rules. Across the street, Jake was still in his driveway, tinkering with his bike. He tightened a bolt here, checked a tire there, and hummed a little song. He looked calm, like nothing in the world was wrong, but Jake wasn't clueless. Oh no, he saw Karen taking pictures. He heard her grumbling about rules and fines. He even caught her talking on the phone, her voice sharp and angry. Most people would have been mad or worried, but not Jake. He just kept working, his hands steady. And if you looked close, you might have seen a tiny smile on his face, like he was in on a secret joke. Have you ever seen someone try to get someone else in trouble? Maybe at school when a kid tattled to the teacher, or at home when a sibling blamed you for something you didn't do. That's what Karen's doing now, but Jake's not sweating it. Why do you think he's so chill? Let's find out. Here's the thing, Jake wasn't just a mechanic who fixed cars and loved motorcycles. He had a side job, something nobody in Oakwood Estates would ever guess. It wasn't anything bad, it was actually pretty awesome. But it was a secret, and Jake was good at keeping secrets. Every time Karen took a picture or made a call, she was making things worse for herself. She thought she was digging a hole for Jake, but really she was digging one for herself. And Jake. He was watching it all happen, keeping track in his head, waiting for just the right moment to surprise her. Karen didn't stop with pictures and phone calls. She marched up and down the sidewalk, looking at Jake's house like it was a puzzle she needed to solve. She checked his mailbox to see if it was up to code. She peeked at his lawn to make sure it wasn't too long. She even counted the steps from his driveway to the street, muttering about parking violations. Karen was like a dog with a bone. She wasn't going to let go until she got what she wanted. And what she wanted was Jake's motorcycle gone. Jake saw all of it. He noticed Karen's glares, the way her eyes narrowed every time she looked at him. He heard her whisper "troublemaker" under her breath, like she thought he couldn't hear. But Jake didn't say a word. He just kept fixing his bike, tightening screws and polishing the chrome. His hands moved slow and careful, like he had all the time in the world. That little smile stayed on his face, growing just a tiny bit bigger. What do you think Jake's secret is? Is he a superhero, a secret agent, or maybe something totally different? Drop a guess in the comments and let's see who's right. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from today. I love hearing from you. The neighbors were starting to notice Karen's detective act. A few kids stopped riding their bikes to watch her stomp around. Mr. Thompson, who lived next door, peeked out his window, shaking his head. Everyone knew Karen was bossy, but this was a lot even for her. Most people would have told her to stop, but nobody wanted to get on her bad side. Karen had a way of making life hard for anyone who argued with her. So they stayed quiet, letting her do her thing. But Jake wasn't like most people. He wasn't scared of Karen, not one bit. He knew she thought he was just a regular guy, someone she could push around. She didn't know about his side job, the one that made him different. Every time she complained, every time she wrote a note or took a picture, Jake added it to his mental list. He was patient, like a cat waiting to pounce. He didn't need to yell or fight, not yet. He was waiting for Karen to make her biggest mistake, and he had a feeling it was coming soon. Karen, meanwhile, was getting madder by the minute. She didn't like that Jake was ignoring her. She wanted him to argue, to get upset, to give her a reason to call him a troublemaker. But Jake wasn't giving her anything. He was too calm, too quiet, and it was driving her nuts. She stood on the sidewalk, hands on her hips, staring at the motorcycle like it was her worst enemy. "This isn't over," she said to herself, her voice low and grumpy. She was already thinking of her next move, something bigger than pictures or phone calls. Jake wiped his hands on his rag and stood up, stretching his arms. He looked at his bike, shiny and perfect, and nodded to himself. He wasn't worried about Karen's plans. He knew she was up to something, but he also knew he had an ace up his sleeve. That secret of his was like a hidden treasure, and Karen was about to stumble right into it. Can you feel the excitement? Karen thinks she's winning, but Jake's got something up his sleeve. What do you think she's going to do next, and what's Jake waiting for? Stick around, because Karen's about to make a move she'll wish she hadn't. It was noon in Oakwood Estates, and the sun was blazing hot. Karen Baxter, the HOA president, had been fussing about Jake Miller's motorcycle all morning. She'd taken pictures, called neighbors, and scribbled notes, trying to get Jake in trouble. But now she was done waiting. Karen had had enough. She stood on her front porch, her face red and angry, and grabbed her phone. She dialed 911, her fingers shaking with excitement. When the operator answered, Karen didn't hold back. "There's a criminal in my neighborhood," she said, her voice loud and dramatic. "He's got this loud, illegal motorcycle, and he's threatening me." Across the street, Jake was still in his driveway, leaning over his shiny black motorcycle. He was checking the tires, calm as ever, when he heard Karen's voice. He stood up slowly and raised an eyebrow, curious but not worried. A police car pulled onto Maple Street, its lights flashing red and blue. Karen saw it and smirked, her eyes gleaming. She crossed her arms and nodded to herself, thinking she'd won. In her mind, Jake was about to get in big trouble. She was sure the cops would tell him to get rid of his bike or maybe even arrest him. Karen felt like the queen of the neighborhood, finally putting Jake in his place. But then something weird happened. The police car stopped and a tall officer stepped out. He adjusted his hat and looked around. Karen waved at him, pointing at Jake's driveway, expecting the cop to march right over. But the officer didn't even glance at Jake. Instead, he walked straight toward Karen. Her smirk froze, her eyes got wide, and her face turned pale like she'd seen a ghost. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice serious, "we need to talk." Jake leaned against his motorcycle, his arms crossed, watching it all go down. He didn't say a word, but a small smile crept onto his face. Karen stammered, What me? There must be a mistake." She pointed at Jake again, her hand shaking now. "He's the problem. That motorcycle is against the rules." But the officer shook his head. "This isn't about the motorcycle, ma'am," he said. "It's about you." Whoa, can you believe it? Karen thought she was the boss, but now the cop's talking to her. What's going on? Have you ever seen someone get caught when they thought they were in charge? Drop a comment and tell me about it. Let's keep going, this is getting good. The whole street seemed to hold its breath. A few neighbors stepped onto their porches, watching with big eyes. Kids stopped riding their bikes, staring at Karen and the cop. Even the birds seemed quieter, like they knew something huge was happening. Jake stayed where he was, cool and relaxed, his motorcycle gleaming behind him. He looked like a guy who knew exactly what was coming. The officer pulled out a notebook and started reading. "Ms. Baxter, we've had reports about missing money from the HOA funds," he said. Karen's mouth dropped open. "Missing money," she squeaked. "That's crazy, I'd never do that." But the officer kept talking. "We've been looking into it for months. Someone been taking cash meant for neighborhood projects like fixing the playground or painting the community center. And all the clues point to you." Karen's face went from pale to bright red. She shook her head fast, her voice getting louder. "This is a lie. Whoever told you that is wrong." She turned to Jake, her eyes burning. "It's him, isn't it? He's making this up to get back at me." But Jake just stood there, his smile growing a tiny bit bigger. He didn't need to say anything yet. The truth was coming out and Karen couldn't stop it. Here's the big twist. Jake wasn't just a mechanic who loved motorcycles. He had another job, a secret one. Jake was an undercover investigator for the city. His job was to watch people who might be breaking the law, like stealing or cheating. For months, he'd been living in Oakwood Estates, acting like a regular guy. But really, he was keeping an eye on Karen. He'd noticed things, little clues, like how the HOA never had enough money for repairs, even though everyone paid their dues. He'd seen Karen buy fancy things like a new car and expensive clothes, way more than an HOA president could afford. Jake had been quiet, but he'd been busy building a case against her. Can you imagine that? Jake's not just a guy with a cool bike, he's like a secret detective. Have you ever found out someone wasn't who they seemed? Tell me in the comments and let's see what happens next. Karen's 911 call was her biggest mistake. She thought she was getting Jake in trouble, but instead she gave the police a reason to show up right then and there. Jake had already shared his evidence with them, papers, bank records, even emails Karen thought she'd hidden. The officer looked at her and said, "We have enough to take you in for questioning, Ms. Baxter. Stealing from the HOA is a serious crime." Karen's knees wobbled. She grabbed her porch railing to stay standing. "This can't be happening," she whispered. The neighbors were all watching now, whispering to each other. Mrs. Jenkins, who Karen had called earlier, shook her head in shock. The Carter kids giggled, pointing at Karen's red face. For the first time, Karen didn't look like the bossy queen of the neighborhood. She looked scared. Jake finally stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked at Karen, his eyes steady but not mean. "Karen," he said, his voice clear, "you really should have left my bike alone." That's when it hit her. Jake wasn't just some guy she could bully. He was the one who'd figured her out. He'd been watching her the whole time, and she'd walked right into his trap. The officer put his notebook away and nodded to Karen. "Let's go, ma'am," he said. Karen tried to argue, but her words came out jumbled, like she couldn't think straight. The whole street was buzzing now, everyone talking at once. Jake leaned back against his